sphenoid, epinal, lateral, nasal, the zygomatic bone, the maxilla, the mandible, and the mandibular angle, the occipital bone, the temporal bone, the parietal bone, and up here we have the coronal suture.
Okay, next is the interior view of the skull. You have the frontal bone, the parietal bone, the nasal bone, the sphenoid bone, temporal bone, ethmoid bone, lacrimal bone, zygomatic bone, maxilla, mandible. Then in the middle, you have the vomer bone. On top of that, you have the inferior nasal conchae. And on the side of that, still inside, you have the ethmoid bone. And then up here, above the nasal, you have the glabella, as well as supposed to be a hole right here, is the the supraorbital foramen notch.
Sagittal suture, the parietal bone, the lamboid suture, the apical bone, and then we have the temporal bone.
You have your cervical vertebrae, C1 through C7. In the middle, you have your thoracic vertebrae, T1 through T12. And down here, you have your lumbar vertebrae, which is L1 through L5. And down here, you have your sacrum. And right down here is your coccyx.
The vertebrae, the greater tubercle, the lesser tubercle, the anatomic neck, and then the head of the humor. The cervical neck is right here. The radial groove, and then you have the deltoid
tuberosity,
and then you have the radial fossa, the cordial fossa, and then you have the lateral right here,
epicondyle,
and then you have the medial
epicondyle,
and the
capitulum, trochlea,
radial tuberosity, the radius, the radial stenoid process, the olecranon,
trochlear,
notch,
coronoid,
and then we have the ulna and the head of ulna. The phalanges, the distal, the middle, and the proximal, the middle phalanges, and the carpal.
Okay, in the carpals, you have the trapezium, the trapezoid, you have your ilium, your pubis, your ischium, you have your coccyx right through there. Then you have your iliac crest, your anterior superior iliac spine. Down here you have your anterior inferior iliac spine. Inside you have your ischial spine. Right down here you have your acetabulum, and this little thing in the middle you have your pubic symphysis. On the femur we have the neck, the greater trochanter, lesser trochanter. Then down here we have the lateral condyle, lateral epicondyle, patellar surface. And if you flip it over, we have the foveal capitis, the head of it. Over here, the greater trochanter, lesser trochanter, the gluteal tuberosity. Down here, the linea aspera. Right here, the intercondyle fossa, the adductor tubercle, medial epicondyle, medial condyle, lateral epicondyle, and lateral condyle. You have the patella. Here you have the tibia, and this one is the fibula.
Go.
Right here, the foot, you have the tarsal, you have the metatarsal, and the phalanges. Also, you have the distal, the medial, and the proximal. Now, we already went over it. We have the skull, the frontal, temporal, in the back, the occipital, and the nasal. You have the orbital cavity, nasal cavity, oral cavity. Right here, you have your mandible, mental foramen. You have your ribs, 1 through 8, which are the true ribs. 7 through 10 is your false ribs, and 11 and 12 are your floating ribs. You have your sternum, your clavicle. In the back, you have your scapula. You have your humerus, also your radius and ulna. You have your carpals, metacarpals, phalanges. You have your iliac, your pubis, ischium, your femur, your patella, tibia, fibula, your tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges. And that's the skeleton.